nation that's going to be powerful. The Iroquois were famous for this, and a lot of our ancestors were famous for this. Well, they had this seven generation philosophy, where everything that you did, you thought about its impact 7 generations down the road. So you weren't doing things for you per se. You were doing things in terms of how it would affect your people 7 generations down the road. We have lost that in this extreme individualism of the West. So many of the things involved in our relationships are caught up in the insanity of the West. We're following a people who don't know what they're doing. We have the adults following the children, and the children don't know where they're going. So we caught up in this super individualism where we can't tolerate anything that does not go our way. That's not how relationships work. It may not be 50-50, but that's not how relationships work. You're not married to yourself. You're not having a relationship with yourself. You have a relationship with another person who is a unique individual just like you. One of the things along the lines of that has to do with romance. And I don't want to talk about the origins of the word romance coming from Rome, but this idea of romance that we have that is so ephemeral, so short-lived, that we see this person, we get excited about this person, we're infatuated about this person, and then it's gone. It doesn't last long. It's all based upon this materialism where you are supposed to demonstrate your love for this person by how much you can spend on this person. And we lost it so quick. When I was a child, I was taught regularly, it's not the gift, it's the intent behind the gift. And I'll give you an example. I can remember when Enya and I were dating, and we were in grad school, and I had no money. But at that time, I practiced Valentine's Day. At that time, I practiced Christmas. I practiced all of these things. And it was expected on these days that you did something. But I had no money. I was a graduate student. So one Valentine's Day, I went and got some pork sausage. And I took the pork sausage, and I rolled it out, and I cut out parts, and I fried her some part sausage. She was, ecstatic about the idea that I had taken the time to think about that to that degree. I know it was stupid, but at that time, that was all that I had. Her mother appreciated me because I went and bought her some long underwear because we lived in Chicago, and her mother understood I was more concerned about her health than about her showing off someplace. We have lost that. To me, that was normal and natural because that was the way I was raised. We have to raise our children the same way. We have to reverse this process, this materialism, people going into debt to impress somebody that they love them. People having to say to somebody 40,000 times a day, I love you. If you do, then that'll be evident in what you do for that person. I love you while I'm smacking you upside the head. I love you while I'm treating you like this. I love you while I'm cheating on you. That's not love. Love is supposed to be an act. It's supposed to be what you do. Now, I am not saying that romance is not part of our tradition. We are human beings. When an African man meets an African woman, more than likely, if there's some interest, then there's some infatuation involved. You like what you see. Nobody wants to get up in the morning and look at something that they can't stand. You like what you see. But our approach to it was very, very different. It was not based upon materialism. It was based upon what I can do for you, how I can show you respect, the amount of protection that I have for you. One of the perfect models of that is the Akan culture, where in their homes, the man always sleeps on the outside. And it's like these traditions follow us and we don't know these Africanisms that follow us here and we don't think about it. My father always slept on the side of the bed that was closest to the door. Always. And I always sleep on the side of the bed that's closest to the door because they're supposed to have to get to you before they get to her. Oh, I'm sorry. We've changed the definition of what it means to be a man. We're supposed to be males now, so it doesn't make a difference. Yes, it does. It makes a major difference. But the Akan people, it would describe it and they would say, the woman, when she had to get up out of the bed to go do something, whatever it was, she would wake him because she had to crawl over him in order to get out of the bed. That's how secure she was. In order to get to her, you really literally had to get through him to get to her. That's one of the things that needs to be brought back. The idea that somebody's tearing through the door downstairs in the house at 3 o'clock in the morning and you ask her, could you go check who see what that is? Something is really wrong with that picture. Something is very wrong with that picture. In the West, romance, because there is this extreme competition between people, between men and women, to see who's going to be on the top, to see who's going to win, to see who's going to have the final say in the decision. But this is a very hateful competition. So romance allows, you can look at it this way, it allows there to be peace enough for there to be procreation. Otherwise, it's just a constant battle between the men and women. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? Who's going to have this? So it creates a safe space for that. This idea of love also, which is extremely problematic within the Western context. And when we say something that's problematic in the Western context, people who don't want to think about it, they say, oh, well, you're saying that romance didn't exist among African people because you're saying something's wrong with it. Oh, you're saying Africans didn't love each other because you're saying something's wrong with it. No, I'm saying something is wrong with it in the Western context. Not traditionally, but within the Western context. So when we talk about love within the Western context, then we're talking about this infatuation, this quick, I fell in love with you immediately. Our ancestors understood that love was something that took some time. It took a long time. It was described as like climbing a mountain. When you got to the top, after all those years of being with that person, when you meet somebody, you may think that you trust them, but you really have no idea whether that person will die or kill for you. When you know, I'm talking about when you guess and when you think. When you know that that person will live and or die for you, then you have love. I said love doesn't come to you been with a person for a long time. It's not a short thing, but because we're in the West has redefined things so that it can play these games with our pockets. It's the same thing when we're dealing with being a human being. Our ancestors did not call you a human being when you were born. You were a person, but you weren't a human being. Human being was something that you earned through your actions. So if you acted like a human being, if you matured like a human being, then you were qualified to be called a human being. The West has redefined this, so you can have people like serial killers being called human beings. Okay? So we have to understand the context of what we're talking about, the difference between Western society and African society. In case anyone is confused, I'm an African, and I'm assuming everyone else here is. And if we're calling ourselves Africans, then that ought to be the tradition that we look to in terms of defining who we are and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to act. No one else's tradition will suffice. No one else's tradition is correct for us. Europeans don't look to African traditions to figure out who they are, who they're supposed to be. They look to their ancestors. We should look to our ancestors accordingly. I wanted to start this out a little differently. When I was in D.C. doing a lecture earlier this year, the brother who invited me over and his compliment, I stayed at their house, and they were having a disagreement. And they were like I can't detect disagreements between couples. I've been married for 27 years. So I know when something is up. And they were trying to keep it on the, I don't want to say down low, because I take it somewhere else. They were trying to keep it undercover. And so I said something to Baba Kush, and he looked at Antu, which is her name, and he said, I said something about you two make such a nice, I was trying to change she guys make such a nice couple, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah. He said, I love Antu, sometimes I like her. And I said, now that's an understanding. That's something that people who haven't been with somebody a long time don't understand. I say the same thing about my wife. I love her to death. Sometimes I even like her. We have to understand, and that's not something that's a problematic, because she'll say the same thing about, she'll probably say, I love him to death, and maybe sometimes I like him. Okay? So it's the idea of love in our tradition is very different than it is in the West. And the idea of what you expect from someone else, how you're supposed to respond to someone else is very different in the West. Now, Brother Kalanji asked me to talk about things that make relationships relationships last in our community. And I really, at first, didn't want to do that. I want to talk about some of the, and I am. I'm going to talk about, I don't know how much time I have, but I'm going to talk about some of the things that we need to think about. So it's going to be sporadic, but some of these things are important to me. The West raises men to look. It's raising women to look now at any and every female who walks by. I remember teaching the class at Morehouse, and there was a sister who was walking down the hallway. You know the sound of sister's shoes is different than the sound of brother's shoes. You got the heels, right? And I'm sitting there watching the class, and this is a class on relationships, so I'm looking at the brothers. I know what's going to happen. And as soon as she stepped into the doorway to pass our doorway, she wasn't coming into the classroom. As soon as she passed, all the heads went. They're trying to pretend that they're paying attention to me, and every single head in the class turned to see her as she passed by the door. Every single solitary one. We somehow get the impression that once we get married, once we find that one, once we fell in love, all of the behaviors that we have cultivated so well over our lives are somehow going to stop. They're going to change. Everything overnight. It's like instantly you're going to lose your eyesight, and you're not going to look anymore. And we don't understand that that's not the way that we work. So if you have spent your life cheating, that's really where I wanted to go. If you have spent your life cheating, I really don't care who she or he is. You're going to find your way back, unless there is a major concerted effort to stop it. You can't just assume that because I found this one, now everything is going to be fine. I'm not going to look anymore. If that was the case, then how come over 60% of the people who get married in our community end up in divorce? It's well over half in the community in general, but over 60% in our community, and that's probably an underestimate in terms of the number of people who end up getting divorced. And we're not, that's not being messed up by the number of people who get married, divorced, married, divorced, married, divorced, married, divorced. That's still a standard, and the standard is growing. When I was in graduate school, it was like 53% of us. Now it's well over 60% of us who get married end up divorced. And a lot of times it's because we come into relationships with the wrong ideas about ourselves and the wrong expectations. And when there are divorces, and now I'm sort of talking off the cuff, when there are divorces, it's not one person's fault. It's not one person's fault. Well, let me put it like this. Very few times is it going to be one person's fault. It's always the person's fault if they put their hands on you. That's a given. But if we exclude that, then you got two people, it takes two people to tango. It's two people who have some kind of issues that's not allowing them to get together. And when we break apart, we end up finding the same person again because we haven't worked out those issues with ourselves. We haven't found what's wrong with us. Now, what's wrong with him or her? We haven't found out what's wrong with us first. We have to solve those problems before we go forward in the relationship. So, know that if this is what you do, if what they used to call reckless eyeballing, if this is what you do every time somebody comes by you looking, I remember, and this is perfect for the West. I remember a show that came on in the 60s, I think it was in the 60s, and either it was called or there was a segment of it that was talking about girl watching, which was based on a song that some brothers did back in the 60s. And they were showing on this program how to be with your woman and to watch other women at the same time. So whenever you're walking down the sidewalk and you see a woman on the other side of the sidewalk and you're holding her hand, then you sort of let her go ahead while you do this and you catch up, so she won't notice the difference because your hand is on. That's the kind of logic you have in the West. That's the kind of logic that you have in the West. What can I get away with? Anybody in serious doubt of that needs to understand the West in terms of when is a lie a lie? When is theft theft? When is murder murder in the West? It's only theft, lying, or murder when you get caught. Otherwise, you won. You got over. You were able to be victorious because you have no moral, no ethical base. There's nothing to dictate what is right and what is wrong. Whatever you can get away with, then that's what's wrong. We have to understand that cheating is not a natural phenomenon. It's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. Most of the things that we see in society are things that are promoted by the society or are appreciated in that particular society to a degree that they're higher than in other societies. There were divorces in traditional African society, but I have yet to read a record of one that was based upon cheating. There were other correctives for that, but it's not that it didn't exist. It's when we look at these things, we have to look at it proportionately. If you have divorces in this country and 10% of them are based on cheating, and you have divorces in this country and 50% of them are based upon cheating, then there's something about this culture that promotes that idea. There's something about that culture that makes it okay. It's something about all of the soaps. It's something about all of the entertainers and people in politics and leaders and in the church who are doing this that make it seem so normal and natural, or makes the people appear or believe themselves to be so weak that this is something they can't help themselves from. This is something our ancestors took great pride in. Internal strength, where you don't have to have massive police forces. You don't have to have people standing on top of you because you know the rules. You think about them daily, and you work very hard to become that kind of person because you're trying to become godlike. Versus here, you believe that you just can't do anything, or you don't develop the strength to do it because you're not strong like that. He can't do it, I can't do it, so we don't work on self. We don't work on strengthening ourselves. Thinking about those people who I know who have been married for 30, 40, 50 years without major incident. And it's not because they're perfect, and it's not because they have defined love in this perfect way. It's because they understand that they're dealing with a human being, and that human being has flaws. Which, of course, brings up another point. And I know I'm talking about marriage, and I'm going to keep talking about marriage because that's where we need to go. There are a number of very important reasons for that. But marriage is the place that we need to go because marriage is the foundation of family. We come from a family-centered, child-centered people. These were the most important priorities for us. When you look at African people today, we have more extended families with all of the destruction, all the chaos in our community. We have more extended families than any other people on this planet. On this planet. And to me, that's a major, massive statement. Marriage is what we have to build because marriage is the foundation of family. It's stability. It's stability for the adults. It's stability for the children. And in the West, it provides a buffer for the female in particular if he decides he wants to go. Because she has something legal. And I was always talking about the brothers, and I'm not bad. Well, I can't talk about the brothers because I'm a brother. It's like sort of like family. The brothers who don't want to get married because of all of the other stuff that goes along with it, and I don't want to get locked up in the system, and I don't want to do this, and I don't want to do that. There are reasons why that occurs. There are reasons why you're supposed to have a marital relationship. We go back to another one of the reasons why we need to think about what we have done beforehand in terms of changing it. There's a brother in D.C. made the point that a whore, male or female, does not make for a good marital partner because that individual is going to find somebody else in that relationship. Okay. Now, I would like to go through a short list of things that'll help people, I think, if they think about it, if they really want these things to work, if they're building for the right reason. Then again, something else has occurred to me in terms of what's an issue. Lying. When I was in school, now I'm sounding old. When I was in school, very few children in the classroom lied. That didn't mean, I'm talking about in terms of when the teacher asked them something, or for homework, or what have you. You didn't have a lot of children lying about it. I'm looking around now, and the vast majority lie. Also, the vast majority of them curse. And it's not because they raised themselves in this world, so we're not looking at bad children. We're looking at the society that they were raised in. Now, let's fast forward this about another 20 years and see what the interaction is within the relationship between the man and the woman in terms of being able to tell the truth to each other. If you're in a relationship with someone and you can't trust them to tell you the truth, then you don't need to be in that relationship. If you're with someone who you can't trust, then you need to get away from that individual. That's extremely important. Okay, now, what makes relationships work?
Another lecture.
Yeah, that's another lecture, or it's a non-lecture. The first thing I tell folks is do your work. I have talked to so many brothers who are conscious or consider themselves conscious. I've talked to so many sisters who are conscious or consider themselves conscious, and they're looking for a man or they're looking for a woman, and they are seriously, they're not playing around with it. They are looking for a compliment. And my first advice to them, which doesn't really set well to many, is to do your work. If you are doing nation-building work, if you are doing work to assist your people, if you have found your talent and you're using that to benefit African people and build the African nation, then whoever you're supposed to be with should be there doing that work too. So that issue is resolved. That umbrella issue is resolved. Because if that person is doing the work, you know where their heart is at. The other little stuff, where you're going to live, how many children you're going to have, all the rest of that stuff, that becomes minor to doing your work and being able to find somebody who you can trust and who you want to be with for the rest of your life. Because you're not going to have a life that's not full of a whole lot of difficulties. You're not going to find somebody, and if you know a couple and they've been together for 6 months and they haven't had an argument, something is wrong. Something is really, really wrong with that relationship. Because people have differences. Just like you argue with your friends, you're going to argue with whoever your complement is. So when we're talking about finding someone who we can have a shared vision together. If it wasn't for the vision that Enia and I share, we would have broke up a long time ago. We would have broke up a long time ago. But that overrides a lot of the stupidity. That overrides a lot of the nonsense. So that vision carries you. Malefe Asante talked about that in, I believe it was Afrocentricity, where if you have this vision of African people being liberated, and that's the goal, then all these other things don't stop that, because you always come back to that goal. That goal is higher, that goal is stronger than the relationship that exists between you two. So the tremendous trifles and all the rest of that is not going to stop you from that goal. We need to redefine romance. We need to redefine it in African terms. Yes, we might want to give her flowers. Yes, we might want to give him whatever. But we need to take it out of the context of capitalism. We need to take it out of the context of buying this other person, because that's essentially what you're doing. The same thing a lot of people do with their children. They don't discipline them. They buy their compliance. They pay them to do what they're supposed to do. And when you no longer have that money, then you have a child that's unruly. You have a child that you can no longer control because you can't pay them, versus having an internal discipline. When we're talking about romance, then we have to talk about things that are non-material. Someone earlier asked what Bibi Fahodier was before this. There is a tree term for I love you. Medowo. Medowo. So every night before we go to sleep, I say to Inya, Medowo and Bibi Fahodier. African liberation, I love you. We need to say it in the terms of our ancestors. And there's also, I guess, for holidays, because let's say we should celebrate Valentine's Day for good reason. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have celebrations. That's one of the reasons why this here today is so important. We have to celebrate ourselves. We can't just sit there and be so mean and fighting and warring all the time. You'll kill yourself. I know folks who are so high blood pressure they got to test it 3 or 4 times a day. A brother down in Florida, he had both of his lungs replaced because he's working so hard for African people. So we have to have celebrations for ourselves. We have to have a way of appreciating ourselves. We have to have days like this where we come together as family and look at each other and just have some fun. Just enjoy this. I'm not an advocate of celebrating Valentine's Day because there is a history that goes with that which is very bloody and has absolutely nothing to do with us, and in the West it is extremely commercialized. There's a brother and a sister up the coast who came up with a Komodo, which is tree for sort of like Love Day, or Black Love Day. The only problem with that is, even though it's a beautiful celebration, they celebrate it at or after Valentine's Day. It needs to be celebrated before Valentine's Day, because if you're celebrating after Valentine's Day, you're already done this. Okay. But if you celebrate it before, when Valentine's Day comes, it gives you something to think about. You can go back and backtrack on it. Another thing that maybe this is the most important thing that holds relationships together is listening. 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 We have a big problem with that. And again, I think this may be a brother thing more than a sister thing. And I'll say it this way also. My wife read a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I refuse to read the book. So when I refuse to read a book, she'll read it, pulling out those things that she knows that I'll get, that I'll understand. So she brought some points back, and she really enjoyed the book. She said it really helped her to understand me. And my first response to that was like, I wasn't very happy with that. But she explained what helped her most in that book was whenever something happened, whenever something needed to be done, whenever there was an emergency, I didn't want to talk about it. She wanted to discuss it. She wanted to talk about it. She wanted to flesh it out, as they used to say. She wanted to see all the angles of it. She wanted to see and then come to a conclusion about what to do. I just wanted to know where he lived. I just wanted to know, I didn't want to discuss anything. After I finished doing whatever it was that I needed to do, then we can talk about it. But I didn't want to hear about it before. And this, I see in a minute, and it has its purpose. Both sides are good. Both points are very good. Because it's important to be able to understand what went wrong so that when you do whatever it is that you need to do, the correct thing is done. And sometimes you don't have time to wait to discuss it, to do what needs to be done. Sometimes what needs to be done then. But men tend to do. And a lot of times women don't understand that. They want to talk about it, so they think that this man is ignoring them. They think that this man is not paying them any attention. They think that this man is dismissing what they're saying because he doesn't want to talk about it. And he thinks that she's just being a nag. She just won't shut up, leave me alone, let me go do this. Because there's a miscommunication based upon the personality of men and the personality of women. And when you understand those personality differences, then it makes the relationship a lot better. Now that we understand it, I'd say bear witness to this. Now that I understand that, and I did not understand that before, now that I understand that, when crises or situations occur, I deal with it differently than I did before. Because I understand that she wants to talk about it. So I'm willing to sit down and talk about it for a little while. And she's willing to sit there and allow me to, make me listen to it, but then let me go before maybe she's finished. And she understands my need to go and solve the problem. But and I think this is the way that most men and boys who are raised to be men in our traditional context were raised. The man's job is to go solve the problem. The man's job is to go do something about it. The man's job is to get up out the bed and handle whoever came in the door. You don't have time to talk when those things occur, and that ends up being a part of all aspects of your life. So even in relationships, it becomes very part. So we don't stop being men when we become part of relationships. We don't stop being women when we become part of relationships. But we have to understand the differences. The next thing is to share, and not just share in terms of what you have with the other person, but understand to share that person by themselves. So what we have is people who do not understand that this other person is an individual and that they need space. In our house, I have my room. And when I'm in that room and I need my privacy, Emiya doesn't come in and she doesn't take it as an insult. She knows that I as an individual need my own space to think. And I know she has her own room and she has her own space. Men and women are still their individual selves and they need space to think. They need space to be alone. As I said before, it's different if that person is talking about some space in Italy somewhere, some space in California, and you're still here. That's a whole nother issue. But when you're talking about needing to have room to breathe from that person, then you need to have that room to breathe from that person. You need to have that space. Okay, that's very, very important in relationships. It's been very important in our relationship because I've been with Enia again for 27 years, and we have had the same jobs at the same place. We've had this homeschool program for 14 years. We're in that house together for 24/7. Every day, all day long. I get sick of her, she gets sick of me. And during those times, I need to go into my space, she needs to go into her space. Everybody needs that. And it's not an insult. People take it as an insult. Well, why don't you want to be around me? Why don't you? Come on, listen. No, I need my space right now. I need to breathe. I need to breathe. Like I said, as long as that space isn't with like somebody else on the other side of the planet, then that's a valid request. That's a valid thing for some people to do. Another thing, take your anger elsewhere. You have to find a way to take that anger away from that person. And you hear me say Enia over and over again because it's almost like one person here when I'm talking about this. Enia is a suggestion which I know works. I'm just not good at it. She will tell brothers and sisters when they're angry with each other, you need to sit down and write your anger in a letter to that person. It's just you can use the full lexicon of 4-letter words that you want to in that letter and just get it all out onto that paper. She said, do not give that letter to that person, but write it out, sit on it for a day, and then the next day write them a letter that says the same thing without the 4 letters expletives in there. That works. I remember the first time I got a letter from her and I didn't open it. I was insulted. I was, upset. Send me some letter. Talk to me. What's wrong with you? And the letter sat there for like a day. And she would come and check to see if I had touched the letter yet. And I opened the letter and she had like 4 pages of what the issue was, what her problem was, what my problem was. And then I realized, okay, there's somebody. I got something to think about now. I was wrong. But to have it explained to me in such a way that I love you, but you are really being stupid right now, that carries a whole different weight. And one of the important parts about that is that it was not immediate. There's one of the oracles of Ma'at said that I will not speak in hot anger. When you're mad at that person right then and there, it's going to come out very negatively. It's going to hurt, and there are things that you say that you can't take back, even with I'm sorry. There are things that you can't remove. They're not going to be lost. That person's going to remember the 30, 40, 50 years from now, and they might not hold that against you, but they cannot remove that because it was so painful. So you need to do something with that anger. You need to find a way that it's not vented on that person because this person has your back. It may be important for you to get in the car and drive for an hour and then come back. Go to Home Depot, do some shopping. Okay. It may be very important for you to go into the room and not slam, but close the door. Usually what happens, I found, after the first hour, 2 hours, and I'm really thinking about it, and really like the first half an hour, I'm mad. And I'm explaining to her just how mad I am in my head. Then the next half an hour, after I've sort of chilled out, listening to some good music, sort of chills out. By the time I get to the hour and a half, I realize, oh, I was wrong. And then you got to come crawling back. But still, to get away, to breathe, to cool off, to chill out, because unless something is extremely wrong in your relationship, you're going to have disagreements, to put it mildly. Also, have to realize that people change. You married an individual. You married somebody who is different than you. One of the major difficulties I see, I want to say with brothers, because that's who I mostly talk to. I don't know about sisters on this one. But brothers don't understand why sisters won't do things the way that they tell them to. If you did it this way, if you open up the can this way, it would be twice as easy. You could get it open up faster. You probably wouldn't cut your finger, everything, and we just do it this way. But she still wants to do it her way. Because he doesn't understand. That's her way. That's the way she does it. That makes perfect logical sense to you. There are some things that you do that she's like, why is he doing it that way? That's like stupid. We are connected to individuals who were brought up in a particular way, and they know themselves, and they know how they like to do things. Oh, which brings me back to another point. I received a card one time from my mother that said, half of being smart is knowing what you're dumb at. When you are looking for a compliment, then the first thing that you need to do is a self-evaluation. You need to figure out what you're good at and what you're not good at, and you need to find somebody who can fill in some of those blanks of what you're not good at. Because you're looking for somebody who you can work with. You're looking for someone who you can grow with. You're looking for someone not to complete you, but who you can do better stuff with. But the first step in that is figuring out what you can't do well. Figuring out what you're bad at. I'm bad with money. You give me $1,000, it'll be gone tomorrow. So I needed to find someone who knew how to manage money, who knew how to take $5 and make it spend like 20. My father was the same way. When I was a child, I could not understand why this man, be a child, a little boy, I did not understand why he would go to work and he would come home once a month and give her his check. And then she would give him a weekly allowance. And I'm like, something's really wrong with this picture. When I turned 17, I understood why he did that. Because I never had any money, but I'm working. She was able to buy him a brand new Volkswagen Super Beetle 1971 cash. He was able to pay for a house in 11 years because she knew how to handle money, and he knew that he didn't. So when he handed her that check, it was based upon trust. He didn't have to look and see what was in the bank account. He didn't have to look to see what was going on with the money. He didn't have to worry about whether he was going to have food to the end of the month. He knew that she knew how to handle money. I wonder if there's a relationship between that and African women being the primary controllers of markets in our traditions. I wonder if there's a relationship between those two things. Between the goddess of the basket, which is what you collected the seeds, the harvest with, and what you kept the seeds in the plant, was the women's domain. So we have to look at what it is that we're not good at in assessing who we want, and we have to be serious about that. I'm not talking about you got a checklist and you go down, okay, are you good at this? No, bad, okay. No, are you good at this? No. But you need to know, at least generally, what you are looking for, what you need. What you need in your life so that you can have a better life. Okay. Another thing you have to, I talked about this before, accept and value children. We got to get out of this selfishness. If we are building a nation, how are we going to do that without children? And how are we going to do that without children who don't know who they are? We are supposed to be the parents, the adults who are raising our children to think like warriors, to think like they have a nation to build and a nation to protect. And if we're not brave enough, if we're not courageous enough to give them the truth, then we're not talking about nation building. We're not talking about sovereignty. We're talking about our own selfish selves. And when we don't teach these children these things and we say, oh, it's because this child may be too aggressive in school or this child may whatever. No, we're not afraid for the child. We're afraid for ourselves. We're afraid of what people will think about us. We're afraid about what will happen to us if the boss gets wind of that at our job. That's what we're afraid of in terms of teaching our children the truth. We're not afraid for the children. If you've been around children long enough, you know they don't have those simple fears. And they can distinguish between truth and stuff that doesn't make sense. And they will discard the stuff that doesn't make sense. And knowing the truth does not turn them into beasts. Knowing the truth does not help them and turn them into haters. My daughter is one of the most loving people on this planet. And she knew about the Ma'afa. She knew about our destruction. She knew about our enslavement.